Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which looks at any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Hosted today by Janita Cathy. Here's Janita.
Welcome to It's a Woman's World. My name is Janita Cathy, and joining me today are my co-hosts, Nava Johnson.
Hi.
Hello. Uma Jenga.
Hi, Janita.
Hello. Dr. Susan Strauss.
Hey, Janita.
Nadia Jordana.
Nice to be here.
Nice to see you as well. And then we have our special guest, Dr. Artika Tyner. Dr. Tyner is a director of diversity as well as clinical law professor at the University of St. Thomas. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So today you've joined us to talk a little bit about President Obama's initiative on My Brother's Keeper. Can you tell us a little bit about this initiative?
Yes, it was launched earlier this spring as a focus on the opportunity gap of really saying how can we bridge some of the access and barriers that African American males and young men of color experience at a disproportionate rate. Some of those disparities are everything from looking at high school graduation levels, being referred out of the classroom for school disciplinary issues, and of course some of the challenges that we see related to mass incarceration. So President Obama took a courageous stand to say, we have to make a difference. This is a social crisis, this is an economic crisis, but more importantly, this is an American crisis that impacts us all. So with that, he was able to partner with a number of corporate leaders, faith-based organizations, and other members of the philanthropic community to really get together and think about how they can make a strategic difference.
Wow. So this is a national initiative. Tell us a little about some of the local efforts that are happening in our state to support this initiative.
Some of the local initiatives that come to mind, and there are plenty of unsung heroes, so please excuse me if I miss some of the other local initiatives, but two that come to mind for me quite immediately. One is Save Our Sons, which was founded by Sergeant Melvin Carter, Jr. And for me, I was just at their celebration this past Friday. And their focus has really been on meeting the needs of young men who are incarcerated in Ramsey County Juvenile Detention Center. For him, it's really been a calling and to find his purpose, to think about how can he help young men go from this cradle to the prison pipeline to new pathways into the community related to success. So he actually goes into the local correctional facilities to mentor and coach the young men from everything from life skills to managing conflict. But more importantly, what I saw as I listened to the testimonial of the young men that he'd been working with, he served as a role as a father, a mentor, and a friend. So for me, as I was celebrating another year of their success, was really focusing on how I could be more of a part of a community network to support the young men who are coming out of the juvenile correction facilities as well. The second initiative, which was created through the University of St. Thomas in partnership with the NAACP, Aurora St. Anthony Neighborhood Development Corporation, and a number of other partners, is called Brotherhood, Inc. And Brotherhood, Inc. is a local nonprofit that focuses on empowering young men of color who have been at risk of entering the correctional facilities or the path to mass incarceration or at risk just generally. So Brotherhood, Inc. provides opportunities to provide them with life skills coaching, but more importantly, a job. It's modeled after Homeboy Industries in LA, and that was started by a Jesuit priest, Father Gregory Boyle. And his model was simple: nothing can stop a bullet like a job. So what Brotherhood provides is on-site employment opportunities. So I have to do a shameless plug. If you're a coffee drinker, their first social enterprise is Brotherhood Brew. So the young men sell a wide range of coffee products as well. So I give those as two examples because those are the ones that I've been involved or supported over the years. And I've seen the impact of the work of going from someone feeling hopeless to all of a sudden feeling empowered, not only for their own lives, but empowered to say I can be a part of the community and I can be a part of this type of change that President Obama is trying to create as well.
Wow. We read in the paper so much that I think Minnesota has got the highest disparity in terms of race and economic, everything from housing to the scores with kids in school, et cetera. Is there any way that this effort can be tied into that? I mean, it sounds like it is with these two initiatives, yes. But we hear particularly a lot with the Minneapolis School District. Is there anything that's going on there, Artika, that you're aware of?
Well, I know there's been wonderful initiatives also through their Office of equity and diversity, and focusing on bringing mentors into the schools in Minneapolis public schools. So that's their programs like the 100 Strong Who Care. And there's been some very explicit focus also on mentoring and tutoring services for African American boys. So I have seen some changes in both school districts, but if I looked at it a bit larger in the scope of what President Obama was referring to, I want to highlight just a little data for you all. I brought just some information for us to think about, because I think oftentimes our analysis ends with Minnesota's so nice. But once we look at these disparities, we can say that systemically, Minnesota's not so nice, because there's some hidden secrets that we have related to the disparities. So my brother's keeper will focus on a few key indicators related to success. The first one is education. So President Obama stated very early on that we need to make sure that we're making an investment in high quality early childhood education. And what stood out to me in looking at the data that he shared was that there's a gap. If you look at children living in poverty versus children in other socioeconomic classes that are higher, middle class families, there's a 30 million word gap in their vocabulary. And at first I had to look again, put my glasses back on. I said, do you mean 3 million? No, 30 million. So as we look at that, we can see that the disparities start very early on when we think about education. So that should give us hope to think about. We know that there are practical things that can work. So investing in early childhood education. And the one thing that I'd like to say before I go into more statistics about Minnesota, as I was reading this and just pondering about it and thinking about my own role, I think we've almost become immune to the sense of we read this data and we say, oh, a black boy has a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison during his lifetime. And we've come to a point, and I think President Obama has stated it as well, that we've accepted that as our reality. But I would distinguish it, that these are facts, but our reality is something that you and I each must create. And that's a reality to say that these types of statistics are not acceptable. So let's start with the first one. 4th grade reading scores by race. This is the state of Minnesota. So by the time that African American boys hit 4th grade, 79% of them are reading below reading proficiency levels. So that shows us that one of the key things that my brother's keeper is focusing on is reading and literacy, that we have to invest our time and resources in that way. The second one that was also startling to me, because I have a nephew that would fit directly into these ages, but African American youth ages 10 to 24 have the highest homicide rate in the state of Minnesota, at 69 deaths per 100,000, compared to white youth where it's 39 per 100,000.
Wow. That's almost double.
It's almost double. And it also mirrors the national statistics. And then once again, when we go into the juvenile justice statistics, we see some disparities there again. And it's in Minnesota, black youth represent 7% of the population, and 40% of youth detain in the juvenile detention facilities, while white youth represent 82% of the population, and only 38% of those detain. And that takes me back again to the work of Sergeant Carter and Save Our Sons. Through the work that we've been able to do under his leadership of helping to support the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, is really to work on these issues related to juvenile incarceration, to ensure that it's a last resort that young people are placed in corrections.
Is Sergeant Carter with the police department or the sheriff's department, or?
He was formerly with the police department, so he's a retired sergeant as well.
Gotcha. Okay.
You know, I hear often, because we have an African-American president, that everybody has equal chance and equal opportunity to everything. I mean, why are we still talking about this stuff? Because after all, you know, there's an African-American person in the White House. How are we to keep this information, not just in front of the black community, but in front of all of our communities, that this is still real information that's impacting not just the African-American kids, but these are our children as Minnesotans, as Americans? How do we keep this information at top of mind in front of people?
Yeah, because it's a lot deeper, a lot more complicated issue than, oh, now we have a black president and therefore everything's all okay.
But you hear that quite often. Quite often.
People aren't thinking critically when they make comments like that.
And how do we encourage involvement, or how do we get this information so that individuals that really don't know what to do, but they want to have a role, they want to make it better, how do we educate them or even provide these opportunities? Is there a one-stop shop, or do they kind of have to just go out on their own to figure out, how do I make an impact for 10 to 14-year-old African-American boys?
That's an excellent point, because I think oftentimes we can have the excuse of, I don't know what to do.
Yes.
So that leads us to inaction. So the White House has actually made it quite easy for us There is a My Brother's Keeper Initiative webpage. There you can find all the information related to President Obama's initial speech in launching the campaign. You also can find resources like the fact sheets that I provided. I had Minnesota-specific information, but you can have some of the national data there. And coupled with that, there's also a task force that's working specifically on this initiative. They launched a report on Friday, this past Friday, and it gave some tips on ways people can get involved. The key areas that they focused on were tutoring and mentoring, because that way, one, you're addressing those educational gaps that I talked about initially through tutoring, but mentoring, I think that's one of the pieces that President Obama talked about primarily. He drew upon his own experience from growing up in a single household with a single mother to think about what led to his success. He admitted making bad choices, but he also talked about time and time again the circle of concern, the circle of support. And in many ways, that's that old adage of a village. It takes a village to raise a child. And if the village is fragmented, what will we do? So I would think, just even if you don't go to the webpage and look at the initiative, the simplest thing is looking at the young people who are in front of you. Because it's easy to say, well, that's not my child, that's not my problem. But really, if we looked at it in a different way, an assets-based approach to say each individual has potential to give, can we unveil it? If we miss out, let's say I just start with you two, and I miss out on the potential of you two on this other end, what does that mean for our society?
That's right.
What if you were to create a cure for cancer? I mean, what if you had this new technology that you needed to create, or this idea? I believe we all are manifested in this way of having a call and a purpose and gifts and talents. So I think the larger scope of it is not a black or white issue. We definitely have to deal with some of the issues related to systemic racism in America and deal with those inequities. But I also think we have to change our frame of reference and say, how can we unveil the assets of each individual?
Channel 5 the other night, and I rarely watch the news anymore because it's always so depressing, but one of the things they were discussing was the fact that the whole Twin City area, maybe it might have been throughout Minnesota, I'm not sure, did not have enough tutors. And if you went on their website, there was a link that any of us could hook up to do tutoring, and they were paying tutors as much as up to almost $1,000 a month to tutor young children. It looked like a good share of it was reading. So I'll pass that on to our viewers here, as well as those of us here in this group.
And there are initiatives in other cities also. It's not just Minnesota. It's in Illinois and Chicago, and I don't know how many other states, but there are initiatives across the country. Is that right?
This is true, yes.
I think it's one of those things where each of us, regardless of the stage of our life, regardless of the children in our lives, we have to take ownership for our community. However you look at it, but it's going to your local community organization, going to your local faith community, going to your local church, whatever it is, and figuring how can I get plugged in. Maybe all I have is 2 hours a week, but that 2 hours a week can make that huge impact, whether it's tutoring, whether it's mentoring, but that's starting somewhere. Because a lot of times when you do hear the statistics, it can sound overwhelming, but all it takes is just one of us to make a commitment of that 2 hours. Or if we really, really don't have the time, then that financial supporting organizations that are doing the work can go far in making sure that other people can then come in and assist or help to create that hope that kids long for. Because there's not a child that's born that is born with the desire to fail. That's born with the desire to, you know what, I think I want to be an offender when I grow up.
Exactly.
No child has that.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And thank you, Dr. Tyner, for joining us today and educating us on this timely topic. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us. Coming up next, we'll be talking about girls and Uganda.